And today we have Kelly King with us, and we're so excited. I have to give you some background on how I was introduced to Kelly. I was on Amazon and I was looking for a book, and I don't even remember what it was, but then there's those suggestion books that pop up, and I was scrolling, and the book title was 10 Ways to Make Decisions with God, and it's colorful. I'm really drawn to color. The cover is really bright and happy. So I clicked on it. I think I did like a sample where I read some of it, and then I was like, yes. And so then I'm reading this book and I'm like, oh my gosh, we have a lot in common. But it's funny because I bought it and then I kind of put it aside. And then I had this prompting probably 2 months ago. Go read Kindle, go on Kindle and like read something. Okay, I don't have anything to read on Kindle. I just finished a book. But then I found this book that I set aside and I read the whole thing in like 1 or 2 days. And I'm like, okay, I was supposed to read this book because Kelly talks about connecting to the other side and spirit teams. And I'm just like, we need to have her on the podcast, obviously. So
Thank you.
Those
I
things fall
was
into
so
place.
flattered because I wrote that 10 years ago, and I don't think anyone has reached out to me about that book in a long time. So thank you so much for reading it, and I'm glad it touched you.
yeah, it
I
was
think these
really
things,
cool.
they happen in the Lord's timing, right? They happen when they're supposed to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
this
Mm-hmm.
podcast has been kind of a thing like that the entire way along. So I think that these messages have people that need to hear them. And the timing is, the fruit is ripe.
Yeah.
Well,
So
thank
thank
you.
you.
Well, I know I needed to meet you guys, and I can't wait to get to know your community as well.
Yeah. And that's why we started this podcast. And that's what keeps bringing people here is they felt isolated or didn't know, like Ella says, how to place their gifts. And yeah, they just needed
Or if,
a tribe.
I mean, there's a lot of doubt around like whether these things are okay, whether they're safe to practice, or it's, of God, God approved, or
Mhm.
or if it's not, and it's something that they need to run from. And I think bringing light to the subject is really positive and opening the door because it's kind of taboo in a way that it should not have to be. And so giving people that support and the learning about it and the development about it, I'm real passionate about that. So
Yeah. So Kelly, when did you first realize, like, when did you start experiencing your spiritual gifts and how would you describe them? What's happened?
Hmm. Well, I always had strong faith. And then when I was in my mid 20s, mid to late 20s, I started to just be more curious about developing more of my spiritual gifts. And I was in a car accident, and I had at the time a newborn baby and like a 4-year old, and it was going around a bend of a creek, and a deer kind of came up, and actually just like kind of came up onto the dash of the like the I'd say the hood of the car, and then the deer kept running up the hill, but it was very startling, especially because I was literally on the curve, like that my car could have had a problem, and I could have tumbled like into the creek or whatever, which that happened recently in our area. I live in Heber Valley. And so anyways, I just felt like, whoa, this was frightening. I was definitely protected. I pulled over, I kind of assessed my car, calmed down, looked around the situation, and I was like, okay, we were okay, but that was frightening. And I got back in the car, and the song that was playing had the chorus, "Oh, know ye not that angels are near." And it was like, whoa, yes, that was a real divinely timed lyric with the circumstances. And so it put
we
me
call
into
that
this.
synchronicity in the business.
Yeah, that like really jolted me of pay attention right now. And so I started asking, well, who are my angels that are protecting me and who are helping me? And I started to just be in this inquiry about it. And then around that time, I felt very prompted to just like open my mind to spiritual education, spiritual learning, how to get closer to Jesus Christ. And I found some mentors and some people that were also on similar paths. So we would talk and things. And then around the time when Elizabeth Smart was found, maybe even like within 24 hours, of course, that was like a big news thing. And for those of us who had been praying for her, a lot of us had been, it was very big news in our church community and in Utah, particularly where I lived. And just the circumstances of her kidnapping and everything, it was so jarring for me personally, and for a girl of faith, which she was, and a woman of faith, a mother of faith. I was like, how did this happen? That this man came into her home and took her out of her home. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. And I felt angry at God and all these things, all these feelings were like, ugh. I was like having a lot of angst. And I went to go to bed angry that night, like really wrestling with God and having a conversation with him. And I was experiencing a little bit of voyeurism, which I know isn't healthy, but I was like, if I was her shoes, how would I feel? And oh my gosh, that was like so scary. And in that moment when I was having this wrestle and like in the middle of the night, it's kind of sleeping and wrestling, I had my first experience with a dark spirit. And I still could tell you exactly where I was sleeping, like what it looked like. It was like one of those like moments. It was a very big, powerful, like on my timeline, that was like one of the most important things that ever happened
It's a
to me.
mile marker.
Oh yeah. And it was frightening to the point of paralyzation. Then I didn't know what to do because I'm like paralyzed and there's this dark spirit next to me. What do I do? I never experienced that, never had anyone tell me about what to do. And so then I finally, I don't know if it just left or what, but in the morning I asked a friend to like pray with me and to help me. And I was taught through that. I opened myself up to be taught. And by being humble enough to ask questions, I was given a lot of direction, a lot of guidance. And that changed my life too, because God was like, okay, this is what went wrong. And here's what you can do. Not that I did anything wrong. I didn't bring evil into the house or anything. I was actually staying at a friend's house at the time. And so it was her and her husband that prayed with me. And then just this flood of information and guidance started coming to me. And then I would say for about 3 to 4 days after that experience, I started to see everyone, I mean, everyone in airports, in stores, in the street. Like I could see them in a different way. Like I could see them in a way where like materialisms didn't matter, what they wore didn't matter, like any kind of status thing didn't matter. I could just like see pure love and Christ-like characteristics, or I discern, like my discernment was like off the charts. It was like I had this x-ray vision for something for 4 days, I would say. And then it was like a direct contrast of like the dark to seeing people in this different way. So I could see that gifts were starting to come like exponentially because of that experience. And then after that, I went home and I talked to my then husband about it. We had a lot of discussions. I talked to some other people, and not everyone had the best advice, but I didn't know really what to do. And so I just started praying. And then shortly thereafter, I started seeing other kind of entities but they were like positive ones. And so I saw, I would say beings of light, people who had passed on, some that I recognized. Yeah, mostly recognized, or there's one that I feel I can share. Well, two I can share. I feel good about sharing. One, I was working on a project that was a fundraiser for Bulgarian orphans. And I'd served a mission for our church in Bulgaria. And I had been working on this fundraiser to fill a container worth of donations for Bulgarian orphans. And it had consumed much of my time, like 9 months or more. And we were doing fundraisers and gathering things and donations. And I was always putting the items in boxes, taping up boxes, and looking for packing tape all the time. And in one of my spiritual experiences during that time, I was feeling very emotionally exhausted, mentally, physically exhausted from doing all this. And I could see when I woke up on my right side, um, there was like maybe a 3 or 4 year old child that was in like a hologram type, um, I don't know, being,
Appearance.
yeah, came to me. And it was in like traditional Bulgarian clothing from like over 100 years ago that they used to wear. And she was just holding packing tape for me.
Oh, wow.
And it was so sweet. And it was just like, I'm helping you. And it was just an instant knowing of like, what you're doing will not only bless the children, but all like we're helping you too, like the ancestors of these children,
Wow.
and I felt like the impact and the ripples would be like up and down, and
Yeah.
it just gave me like this surge of encouragement. And then I had another experience around that time where I was helping a friend fulfill a project that was of spiritual nature that was going to impact people. And my grandma, she came to me, and I'd never met her in this life, but I knew what she looked like from pictures. And she looked like she was like maybe late 30s, early 40s, maybe, like absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, pristine, like being, heavenly being. And I could just feel her presence. And she had been a teacher and a secretary, and she was like a gospel teacher. And so I just felt, okay, like I'm not doing this by myself again. So I think that's when you're doing things that have merit, or when you have like a soul calling or purpose, that's when you can ask for help. And so then I
Mhm.
started to be more open to asking for help on purpose, not just, oh, now there's someone helping me. It's like, okay, no, I want to be proactive in asking for help. And so in my book I reference spirit teams, but I would just call them your heavenly support team.
Yeah, support team.
And
That's what I say a
so
lot.
yeah, and so like if we want to talk about that now, we can, or later, but then I was just like, okay, well, let's bring this on for this purpose. Let's bring it on for this purpose. And I started to really exercise and practice that principle of, if I want to make more impact in the world, have, have easier, um, more effective efforts, then what am I missing here? Like, I need heaven's help, you know?
Yeah. I had a
So,
similar experience. So that's interesting, the Bulgarian story. A few years ago, when the Afghan refugees started to come to Utah, I was living in Utah at the time. Um, I got really involved through a friend with helping these families. And one of my friends in particular, who had helped refugees in the past, she was really passionate about creating social opportunities for these Afghan women, because the men typically work outside of the home and the women stay home with kids, and they're lonely because in Afghanistan they're living possibly in villages with lots of family, and now they're just like in these apartment complexes, and they might not know a lot of their Afghan families. They're newly arrived. So we put together these like events where the women would come. Well, we would drive them, we have to pick them up and put their kids in our kids' car seats and get together like at a church. And we had this like Women's Day event with food, and it was really special. And I was trying to think of like what we would call our little women's get-togethers. We did a few of them. And I remember one night I felt the presence of an Afghan woman from the other side who just wanted to let me know that she was aware of what I was doing, and she was excited about it too. And later on, and she showed me this like golden butterfly, and that's what we kind of used as for our
oh my gosh,
logo.
that's what my grandma brought me. That's
What?
so weird. I'm not kidding you. That's
Yeah.
so
Spirit
weird.
symbol.
It's
That's
yeah, it was this golden butterfly, and gold is like a color that is used a lot in Middle Eastern countries, Afghanistan. And so then later I found out that this translator who had been helping us for free with these events, she offered her services. She'd been in the United States for most of her life. Her mother passed away. And I didn't know that at the time when I had the experience, but I was like, I really believe it was her mom coming to me. And unfortunately, her mother had died because of the Taliban. Like it was a violent act. So it was just, sometimes it's just so incredible like, of course, we're surrounded by help from the other side, but sometimes experiences happen. And you're like, oh my gosh, I just didn't realize how connected we all are. I had no
Yeah.
idea.
So I just had to tell you about the grandma thing about the butterfly. So after she left, it was, I kid you not, like, it was a moth, but it was a physical golden moth, and it was on a, like, almost like on a web like string above my head when I woke up.
That's so weird.
That's
I
bizarre.
was like, okay, and the cover of the book that I was working with my friend was a golden butterfly.
Again, the
And she
synchronicities.
was just like, I am helping you, and I'm gonna make you remember it, and here you go.
Here's your golden
I think
And
butterfly.
a lot of times
yeah,
it's because we don't realize how present they are in our life that they have to speak up through
yes,
synchronicity. So
yes,
I wanted to approach the subject. So there's a pretty, I don't know, this is my world. So I'm in out of like the
I love it.
mechanics of it and how it functions and the different debates
It's
that
a
happen
language.
between people's
Yeah,
beliefs. I mean, like, and everybody, like anything else, everybody has different experiences with the spirit world, even people who are in tune with the spirit world. And so I always say that all these things are theories. They're theories until, we pass and we get there and we see exactly how it works. And probably the truth is somewhere in the middle of all these things, right?
yeah,
So there's a really interesting tension that occurs between um, the people on the other side, our loved ones, our helpers, our angels, being around us all the time. They're so present all the time. Like this is something that comes up constantly for me in sessions. Like, oh, so and so wants to tell you that they're here and they help you with this thing, and so wants to tell you they help you with this thing. Um, and they kind of want to be recognized for it because then maybe that
yes.
enables them more to be more
So can I
helpful.
say something about that really quick? I think that we also need to acknowledge right now that they want to be named.
Yeah.
They do.
Um, and
That's
they want
true.
to be known. And
Yeah.
I think that goes beyond maybe mere appreciation
Mhm.
because I mean that's a very human thing. Not to say that they don't have ego on the other side still. They're not
But
totally perfected all the
how would
time.
you like to say it? Like, hey, friend, or like, hey, darling Michelle.
Yeah.
Right.
oh, I love that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But also it's connective. And
Yeah.
I think the interesting tension comes with like there is some kind of parallel between they can do a lot for us, even without recognition. Constantly,
Yes.
there's behind the scenes work going on all the time. We're like the lead
Can
man in
I
our own
share a
show.
cool story about this?
Yeah.
So, a dear friend of mine shared a dream that she had, and she could see in her dream her grandmother was on a rocking chair. And her grandma would just keep rocking on the rocking chair. But if she would ask her grandmother for help, she could get up and she could say, yes, I would like to help with that, or no, I decline. But
Hmm.
unless she asked, the grandma just kept rocking.
Right. And that's the point that I'm going to make is the tension comes between what they're allowed to do and how they're helping us because they
Yeah.
are. And then our choice, our ability to ask them in to help us more with specific things. And it's like,
Mhm.
how needful is that? Is that needful all the time? Maybe not. Is that needful some of the time? Maybe more effective some of the time. So it's like where is that line? There's a load of different thoughts and concepts about how this works on the other side, but no matter what the definite answer is, I don't think it's hurtful to ever be aware of
Well,
that
what
and
is
to
one of the
ask for it.
biggest scriptures that's repeated in all of scripture is ask and you shall receive,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And it's like we are told over and over again, ask.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a book that I read. It has a bunch of spirit or near death experiences from an LDS perspective, just from different LDS people older. Like I think this book was published back in like the 70s. It's an older book. And one of the dreams somebody had was he went to heaven and he got to see this warehouse full of these beautifully wrapped presents. And that was just part of his tour, on the other side. And he was asking his guide, like, what do these represent? And his guide said, these are the gifts that are waiting for you that you have not asked for yet. Um, and that reminds me of who's the historian who passed from cancer? Not
Kate
Melissa in a
Holbrook?
way, but Kate Holbrook.
Kate Holbrook.
Kate
Yeah.
Holbrook gave a really well known speech at a women's conference, and she said that God is waiting for you to ask him the questions that you need to ask for him to give you the personal revelation or the answers that you need to receive. God is waiting for you to ask those specific questions. So I love
So
that
Yeah.
one of the
concept.
things that I've done before in my faith community, is for 30 days do a challenge where you say, God, what is the question you want me to ask you today?
Mm.
And so when you ask that, then you're surrendering even knowing what question,
Right.
and then it's kind of reverse engineering it where you're like, well, I don't even know what to ask you. So give me a question. And then the question will come right to your mind. So then you just say it. And then you can start to search out the answer, right? Or you can go opposite and be like, I need this answer. So what is the question that goes with that? Do you know what I mean? So you can do both ways, right?
That's cool.
Yeah. What is that scripture that talks about um if you maybe it's not a scripture, maybe it's a concept. That if you don't know what to pray for, pray until the Spirit will
Oh, I think that's a
inspire you to
quote
know what to
from,
pray for.
yeah, from President
Yeah, I
Young.
think
Yeah.
yeah. Or possibly a spiritual leader from our church named Elder Holland. I think he
Yeah.
mentioned that just recently. Um, so there is an interesting tension, I think, between kind of this whole play between agency, between our choice in the matter, and also um, a divine loving Father in heaven who is going to be leading us on this path, on a path, to our highest development, our highest good, whether or not we're necessarily asking those things. I think that there's an interesting parallel. What is that? Um, sorry, pregnancy brain.
I know. I was just gonna say
I'm,
pregnancy
I'm
Oh,
brain.
usually
you're
so much
excited.
sharper than this. It is a paradox. It's a paradox that we balance in a Christian faith, right? And I think some people get really paralyzed by, oh, I'm not doing enough. I'm not like approaching or asking the right questions. I'm missing all of this stuff. That's me. I'm like, I can't miss it. I can't miss all of this stuff. And what I've come back to is that um, if you're doing the best that you can do and you're trying to, be in line, be attuned to your Father in heaven and the Holy Spirit and faith, and you're doing those things, you're not going to go astray because the Lord is going to take your hand and make those mile markers happen that need to happen, whether or not you are aware of it or not. But that doesn't mean that it's in necessarily the most effective way. So I'm all about efficiency and maximizing that as well.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
So your book talks about you, we were talking about earlier about, if I need help in this specific area, I'm going to call upon this person. So what really stood out to me in your book was you talking about asking specific people for
Mhm.
help in different situations. You want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I've had a lot of fun experiences with this. So, I'll just give a couple examples. So I used to have a special relationship with Walt Disney, and I used to call on him for creative projects. And when I was working on certain things, I was like, okay, I need your entrepreneurial advice or I need your whatever. And sometimes I would feel like um instant support and ideas would flow and whatever. And then years went by and I was working on doing this stone for a custom home build that we were doing. And I was like, oh, I need Walt again. He's built castles. He's going to help me with this. And so I just said, hey, Walt, if you're available, will you please come with me to the stonemason appointment? Because I need help like articulating the vision. And he said, I can't, but I'm sending Coco. And I was like, Coco? And all of a sudden it was Coco Chanel. I was like, oh, I will take her. Yeah, thank you very much. And so there was such a joy moment for me of like, I got you. I'm not available for that, but like, I got another design person that you will find a lot of joy with. Where he could have said, I'm sending someone else, and I wouldn't have known who it would be, but I would have been okay with it. But I just giggled with delight with that. And I just feel like this is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be like, well, we're creating together and it's a collaborative thing. And, and that moment was a creative project. It wasn't like I'm trying to advocate for my child who's has this disease, I mean, like it was a completely different kind of project. But as I have exercised this concept of like, okay, what is it that I'm trying to achieve? Where am I stuck? Who has these certain gifts? Another example, maybe I use this, I don't know what I've shared in that book, it's been a while. I was filming a video, and the film crew that I had hired, they had technical difficulties with their camera. Light was fading. They were getting stressed out. I needed to get something wrapped for this project. And I just said, you know what? Let me just say a prayer for a minute. And I thought about an ancestor who had been a photographer. And so I just said a prayer and I said, God, if so and so is available to fix this camera right now, I'll take it. And before I even finished the prayer, the camera guy goes, "Oh, it's working. We're good. Let's go." And I just giggled with like, "You're so fast. You're so good." Give him credit. And so yes, I do want to give God credit, but like he is orchestrating all of the angel teams. And so that's one of the reasons why God can get so much stuff done, right? Is that he has so many willing, spirits. And I'm going to say not even just humans, but like all things denote there is a God. All things hold the energy out of love. So like animals have definitely been answers to my prayers many times. I have seen elements answer prayers and give hope. And so I feel like anything that is of highlight purpose can be part of that spirit team. Do you know what I
I
mean?
love that answer. So
Yeah.
a question I have that would follow up for that, just to be the devil's advocate voice. I feel like there
Yeah.
are a lot of people that shy away from these kinds of beliefs because it feels like kind of stepping on the toes of like praying to other things, right? Idolatry. I wouldn't define it under that. I'm in your camp. But what would you say to people who are like, well, why are you asking for things outside of God's help? Why are you looking for a
I
middleman?
mean, all I'm doing is I'm recognizing the gifts and talents of others, and I'm saying, God, I know that my grandpa has this skill set, or whoever has the skill set. If they're available to help me, like let's bring them forward, right? And I know that they have like my highest interest at heart, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I don't see any challenge with that at all. Where I feel like things get sticky, where people are confused or scared, or is like, well, what if this spirit tells me to do something that's not appropriate? Well, use
Right.
your wisdom.
Right.
Like, what the 10 commandments are. What, scripture says. What feels good to your body. The Galatians, 5:22-23, I think it is. It says like these are the fruits of the spirit, right? If
Hmm.
they're anything that's not the positive fruits of the spirit, like that's not of God. So like we don't need to get confused. Like we know how to
Yeah.
get a good answer.
I love that you state that because that is the same thing. That's like literally the same answer that I tell people all the time.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I quote that. I quote that scripture. It's the fruits of the spirit. That's how you will judge. That's how you can
Yeah.
discern where this is coming from. Because I get the question all the time. It's like, well, if you're asking for that, if you're opening that door, how do you know who's coming? How are you sure it's something good, not something evil that's giving you this answer, right? That's
Hmm.
influencing you, that you're going to
Well,
go
and
follow.
I will say it depends on your intent too,
Yeah.
right? So I know someone who was trying to justify adultery. Mm, guess what? That's not of the spirit.
Yeah. That's
So
not common decency.
no. And so if you're trying to do something that's a sin, then yeah, you're probably going to find some justification
You
through
always will.
whatever
You
means.
always will.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I love that as well. You have to make sure that you are in tune with the spirit in order to operate fully within the discernment that God is giving you.
And if you're
Right.
ever confused about guidance, then you can double check and you can say, okay, well, say it's just, like right now, I need to go read my book because I don't know where to move. I'm like, okay, I'm in a season of moving again. And that's the reason why I wrote the book in the first place, is because I was living in Bali at the time and I was trying to decide if we're going to move to Mexico or back to the US or what. And so I was wrestling with it, and it was kind of like a case study while I was writing the book. And by the end of the book, I'm like, okay, and here's how my answer came. And I'm in the same scenario right now where I'm like, okay, here I am 9 years later. I've lived in Heber Valley for 9 years, trying to figure out where I'm going to go next. I'm a single, empty nester woman. Where does God want me? What does He want me to do? What's in my highest good? Well, my most important thing is I fulfill the work that I have on the earth. That's my most important thing. If that includes, a certain kind of work, I want him to tell me. If it includes a certain location, I want him to tell me. If it
Right.
includes a certain group of people, I want him to tell me. So I kind of need to delve into those kind of questions right now. And then I need to start just getting really humbled of like, okay, my will and your will need to align, God. So help me to get out of the way and
Right.
help me to not do what I want, but what you want for me. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
You wrote about this in the book. I'm going to read this quote. So you give
Yeah.
people a challenge. You said that we must seek to clear our minds and then be ready to actively listen. So you give people like these practical challenges at the end of the chapters. And you said, set aside a few times this week to be still. And you italicize those words and intentionally connect with God. Take some deep breaths and imagine Him beside you. Note how you feel as you do this. Is it hard to turn off the distractions? Easy to tune in? What makes you feel closer to Him? And then your second prompt is write and ponder about how you have received answers in the past and how you can trust God to guide you in the future. And then number 3 was pray vocally in private with a pen and paper. And this is huge for me because I'm like such a note
Yeah.
taker. Before praying, write down your questions. After asking them out loud in prayer, listen and then write down any insights that come to your mind. So I love these practical application tools because a lot of times, we can go deeper than just, okay, get on your knees and ask a prayer. Like, write your questions down,
Yeah.
write answers that you receive. Like, prayer doesn't have to just
Wrestle.
be on your knees. Exactly.
Right.
This creative process.
One of the people that I'm super close with on the other side that is that special kind of relationship that's been built spiritually is Richard G. Scott, who was another spiritual leader for our church. And he's just always been such a sweet spirit for me. In any, addresses that he's ever given and his life and his study and things. And some of my favorite things that he said that he has since on the other side brought to my attention repeatedly during times of struggle and times of answer seeking and quandary have been that very thing. He was notorious for having a pen and paper in his
Yep.
hand all the time. And one of my favorite quotes from him was, when you're receiving inspiration, write it down and then stop and ask if there's more, and then write it down and then stop and ask if there's more.
That's such
And
a good one.
it's one of my favorite things to approach in prayer, just in that way. I think we have a really set notion of what prayer has to look like, and it should be this, and it should be this, and it
Yes.
should be this way. When I think sometimes it might need to be that way, but sometimes also it is just a communication with your Heavenly
Let's talk
Father.
let's talk about the next step of this. So what I have done, and I don't know that I talked about this in the book or not, but so I write out my prayers. And so
Right,
I
a
write,
written prayer.
yeah, so I write out my prayers and then I will ask for letters back. And so what I'll do is I'll write my questions or whatever in the letter to God, and then I will say, "Dear Kelly," and then I will just pause and I will listen and sometimes it's back and forth, back and forth. My friend will do it with two different color pens, but
Mhm.
you can do it however you want. But then as you start to have promptings or ideas or whatever, then you can start writing. But sometimes it's free flow, sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it takes time. sometimes I write 3 or 4 letters to God before I'm in the humble place to receive.
Yeah. Or in the flow,
But
even. I mean, sometimes I think it just takes us to get ourselves out of our, earthly
yes,
mindset to connect on a deeper
yes.
level.
Another thing that I do is I like to host silent retreats. And so silent retreats are interesting. So I'll do day ones, like from like 9 to 3, and I'll have maybe 12 plus women. And we hold each other accountable to silence, but we'll start with intentions and then we'll end with what we kind of got out of it. But it's interesting for the first 90 minutes, people, and I tell them no electronics. So like we're like just there with scripture, journals, and that's about it. And sometimes we're like going on walks in nature, or, things like that. But it takes about 90 minutes for everyone to kind of drop in to a place. So if you think about that, how many times are you able to really have 90 minutes of silence or quiet? Not very much. And so if you aren't building into your day or your week some moments for silence or quiet or going on walks or whatever you need to do, and shower times, things like that, that's where the body can kind of release the chatter.
Yeah.
And so I would definitely recommend building in maybe even once a month, a time where you have an extended time to just to be quiet, or maybe I like the accountability with some other people so that you're not tempted to, yeah, sure, I could be quiet in my own house, but I'm gonna go do laundry. It's like, no, that's not the point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You like have some time to,
That reminds me, Camille, of
Of
when we
Dove?
interviewed
I
Deb.
was going to
We
say the
interviewed a
same
quantum
thing.
physicist, and he was talking about how his connection with God, he noticed when he was hiking. That's where he goes into nature, right?
Yeah. He says it's about 40
Grounding.
minutes for him, right? Or
Yeah.
50. There's like a magical number.
Imagine, yeah. And that is where he drops into that space where he can reach that connection. And I think there's definitely something to that because your body has to relax into it, like you were saying. Your
yeah.
mind has to relax into it. So we go into prayer or we go into expecting an answer in a holy place or in even in your own bedroom. It's like now, right now.
Right now, right now.
And that's not how it works. You got to ponder, you have to be still, you have to sit in that.
You have
We
to
call it
prepare
meditation.
to receive, right?
Right.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
you have to be in a place where you're willing to listen to the answer,
Right.
right? So let's talk again about angel teams a little bit. So what you can do is you can write letters to God and or, prayer, whatever. And then you can say, who should my mentors be right now, living or dead?
Hmm.
And who do you want me to learn from? Who do you want me to counsel with? And you can build out your angel team that way. And then you can, what I invite people to do is have like a board meeting basically. And so you have a set day, time, agenda, and then you go through the matters of your heart, right? And here's what's going on. And so I'm going to take my own advice and do this week because I'm in this time of like, okay, what should I do next? And so when you're in a time of big decision making or transition or whatever, especially, do this. But at one point I was doing my angel meetings every week on Sundays. I remember we were living in Hawaii at the time, and I would go to the beach, and I had a certain bench I would sit on, and I would pray, and sometimes sit there for 2 hours while I was going through each question, and I write down what the promptings, and in my mind's eye I would imagine that we were in a boardroom and I could see the different people, and I would ask the group, different things, and sometimes I would know like who's saying what answers, and sometimes it's just a collective, here's some ideas or here's some thoughts. And then I would go and implement the things for the week and then come back and report to them and then do it again. And that's when my business was doubling and tripling. And I was also a service missionary at the time. And so it's just like you can be effective if you leverage,
If you utilize your
Yes.
support.
Yes.
If you take advantage of the help that is being willingly offered to you from the
Yes.
other side.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to circle back to that concept of, and maybe this is a total tangent, but how do you know you're connecting to something good? Um, After my son Wesley passed away, he was only 3. Um, I wrote a book about like connecting with him and, on the other side. And I said, when you have a little kid and they're asleep and you go into their room at night and it's just peaceful, right? And you just sort of like or you're cuddling up next to them, or you just kind of right next to their little body, you can feel their sweet little spirit, and you can feel what makes their spirit unique. There's an essence to each person that they have their own like vibe or feeling. Um, and so Wesley, my son, is just this especially sweet. Like we called him our sunshine boy. His blonde hair, big smile, but like his just sunshine from the inside that comes out. And there is no negative entity that could imitate or reproduce that pureness. And even if they could, why would they want to? You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
why would some negative entity have this interest in helping me feel connected and peace around his
Well,
death and love?
okay,
Like,
I'm gonna say it's because they're trying to deceive you, to manipulate you to go their way, right?
yeah.
So I'll just throw it out there. So my ex-husband was following some dark spirits, okay?
Mhm.
And I know for a fact that some of them did pose as light, and he was confused, and
Mhm.
they would do like, the whole 99 truths and a lie thing. And then it was
Mm.
98 truths and two, so he started, it's that whole like, just let me get you like very, and so it wasn't like overnight that my ex was like drawn to that side, right? It was like
Yeah.
a very slow process. So I would just say be really, really careful about what it is that your intention not is, right? Because even though you might want good, is is all of what you want good? Is there like a piece that's a little bit deceptive or a little bit? And that's where they can get in there. It's like you have to have pure intent if you're going to do this work. You
Hmm.
have to be in full alignment of like the highest good. And how do you know? Well, it's fulfilling the work of God on the earth. It's bringing souls to Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
It's if it's not that, it's really not the purpose of the work.
Yeah, that's an
That's
interesting point. I was connecting with one time my son, after he passed, and I was having a particularly hard time with work. There was something going on that was stressful. And I was just talking to him about it. I was driving by myself and I was just like, Wes, I've been having a really hard time. And he came to me and he said, well, have you prayed? He's like, Jesus knows that you're struggling with this. Have you prayed about this? I was like, yeah, I have, like quite a bit. And he's just redirecting me back to God, like, pray about it some more, you know? I think that when you have spirits on the other side that redirect you back to God and Jesus, that is
yeah.
another way you can know.
That's my master indicator that I tell people all the time. I'm like, if you want to know something is good, is it focused on God? Is it focused on building your connection with God and Jesus Christ? If that is the fruit, then it is of
Yeah,
God.
and so here was the wavering point, was that if it's building a person up and their own pride and their own
Right.
importance,
That's priestcraft by definition.
mhm, it's
Right.
pride.
And
Yeah.
it's ego checking. I mean, that is the whole balance that you weigh here. And that is where the slippery slope kind of begins, I think, with people. So I completely agree that you have to look at yourself deeply and then look at what they're also impressing you to do deeply. And is that aligned with, are those two things aligned? And are they aligned with what you already know? And
Yes.
what you're already trying to live. And if all of those pillars are together,
Yep.
then you're on the right track.
Yep. Or just be honest and be like, "Oh, I'm really struggling in this area." Okay, great. Well, let's get you some help.
Right.
Hmm.
And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in asking for help either, or in being wrong.
Right.
Well, we have had a wonderful conversation with Kelly. And I think we have talked a little bit about bringing you back. We have some more concepts that we would love to explore.
And
I
I
love
actually
it.
want to see what happens after this week of you talking to God more. Like, I'm like, tell us
Right.
what happens next.
We're on the story. We have to know the
Yeah, I'm
outcome.
Sounds
sorry.
good. Well, yeah, I'll give you like a little bit of the little teaser part. So, 4 or 5 years ago, I was guided to buy a property that's 5 acres with a massive amount of remodeling to do, and I'm actually in process of selling it as is. And there's a lot of miracles around this property, and the amount of time, energy, resources, and everything that's gone into this home is almost the amount that I owe with my divorce. And so, like, God told me at all costs to get this property, and it's literally the thing that's going to rescue me financially from some of the obligations. And so I know that, like, it's all gonna work out. Like I'm on like kind of in the 11th hour
Hmm.
of where the money's gonna come in. It's a private sale. It's like all these little things. It's not like it's such a blessing. And then it's like, so I know that he's gonna prepare the next thing too. But I also feel like there's a lot of choice in my life right now because of what I've been through, and also in just this season of being an empty nester. And so I am kind of excited. And I think that sometimes with making decisions, God's like, well, what do you want? You know? And
Mhm.
so he's letting me play a little bit. So I don't think we necessarily have to have a definitive answer sometimes. Sometimes he's like, well, why don't you explore a little bit? Like, let's get out the paints and put some colors on the canvas and see what feels good. So even though I want answers, he's also like, do you really? And so it'll be kind of funny to see like what comes up. So I might be a
Yeah.
little bit gypsy for a little bit. So we'll see.
There's something about that lifestyle. I mean, some of us really yearn for that.
I
So
I I used to
I
do
do.
that. I
I'm
was
in the
definitely
military. I move every 2 years, man. So
so good. So good. Well, I'm so glad to be your friend, and I'm also glad to be part of this community and learn more from the other podcasts and the people that are participating and all of that. So thanks for good
we
conversation.
know that we have some other projects that you've been
Oh, yeah.
working on. Can we give you a moment to like highlight
Oh
those?
yeah.
How can people find you or contact you?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm really committed to doing is giving people more tools and practical opportunities to co-create with God. And so I created an 8-week coaching program called Creation Circle. And so if you're interested in learning more about that and like when it starts, this is actually one of the journals that goes with it. I love the spiral
Hmm.
image there. And so every good thing that I've created in my life, it goes to, was I co-creating with God? And I was. And anytime I've seen miracles happen, it's because I've been deliberate and asking and co-creating and making them happen with him. And my angel teams. So I just want to teach people more of that. So if this is interesting to you, I have an Instagram, Kelly King Creates, so you can connect with me there. And I also have a non-denominational Facebook group called Creating with God that I've had for 14 years. And that's just like where I make announcements about like silent retreats or overnight retreats of any type or coaching programs I do. I'm also a top global leader with doTERRA essential oils. And so I have seen what essential oils can do to help the body, mind, and spirit. And so I love those too. And I'm always looking for more modalities of either holistic nature and or the spirit too, so that we can just play with the full range that's available to us.
Yeah,
I love that.
that's
Mhm.
awesome.
As always, you can find us here on our podcast. You can communicate with us through our website, which is
Throughtheveilepodcast.com.
we're linked to our Facebook there, to our email there. If you would like to book a session with either Camille or I, we can be contacted through there as well. And we're excited to connect with Kelly on a week in the future. So
Yeah.
thank you everybody for listening.
Thanks so
Thanks for
much.
being here. Bye.